We're now going to sculpt our helmet. Currently, the model is really clean and nice, which is a problem because we want this to look like it's been beaten up. Maybe the owner of the helmet was hit in the head and it's been on a deserted battlefield for like 2000 years. So we want this to be a bit more broken up. In order to do that, we're going to be using the sculpting tools. Now, we have a whole section on the sculpting tools in the previous section of the tutorial in the whole Learning Maya section. So if you are in doubt, just revisit that. We're going to be using most of the wax brush for this and just giving them some nice bumps and just mess them up a little. Unlike other sculpting tools, we don't really have subdivisions. So what we'll do is that we are going to just manually subdivide it, just using the smoothing. And then we'll just sculpt it from there. Before we do that, we are going to add one loop here and one loop here. You can see these polygons, they're pretty square or pretty rectangular, and we want them to turn square. So first off, we are going to enable symmetry. We can do that if we go up in the menu, in the middle. We can now set this to Object X. And now you can see Symmetry Object X. And then we can shift right mouse button with the object selected and select multi-cut. Now we can hold down the control key to do a cut, like a loop cut. Control middle mouse button to do a cut in the middle. Now you can just see that it's a bit more even. This is necessary for us to actually get nicely sculpted topology, because otherwise it's going to be really stretched. It also just makes this a bit easier as well. Now you can see that this stretches a bit less in terms of the topology. So it's a really good idea in general to keep it nice and even. We're also going to add a loop here as well, just to make this a little bit more even. Control middle mouse button, just in the middle. And there we go. Before we really get into sculpting, we're just going to do some light scene management. The first thing is we're going to disable the layer. We don't actually need to have the image planes enabled because they don't really do anything right now. We already blocked in our shape, so they've done everything we need them to do. Next up, we're going to be naming these pieces and deleting history and just cleaning it up a little bit. Select them both, Shift-Alt-D to delete history. Then we're going to group them, Control-G. We're going to disable symmetry. And now we're going to call this model _GRP for group. And then we are going to name this. This is going to be head piece _geo. Geo is really nice to have because that just indicates that it's a piece of geometry, unlike a group. Then we're going to call this helmet main geo. And then we're going to group these again, and we're just going to name this group here unsubdivided or unsmooth. This just means that we can always go back to this version should something happen. Currently, the plan is to duplicate this one and subdivide this group. So Control D, and now I can call this smooth and sculpting group. Then we're just going to be hiding this group. This is just so that we know that this one here is the sculpted one, and it's just a lot easier to work with. Then we are going to be selecting this piece and shift right mouse button and smooth. Now you can see it's subdivided once, which means that every single polygon is now 4 times heavier. We can also set the divisions to 2. This gives us more resolution to work with. We can also add more later on as well, as long as you don't delete history. Let's do the same with this guy. Hit the G key, and let's set the subdivisions to 2. I recommend that instead of hitting G once more and adding another smooth modifier to it, or smooth operator to it, that you instead actually just increase the amount. And then we can start sculpting. We start sculpting by holding Shift right mouse button, Sculpt tool. And now you can see that the Sculpt tool has been enabled. It's really important that symmetry is off at this point. I really want to make sure that we sculpt this properly without any kind of symmetry enabled, because that's just going to look really fake. Then we can hold a Control right mouse button and we can disable show wireframe. I really don't want to have wireframe enabled. We can hit Shift right mouse button to get up the different brushes, or you can get the brushes from up here as well. This is again personal preference, and I just prefer to use the marking menus. But if you want to, you're more than welcome to choose a brush from up here as well. I'm using the wax brush, and you can easily change the brush size by holding on the B key and just dragging up and down. But if we try to sculpt now, you can see that the intensity is all crazy. So we're just gonna have to double click on the brush icon and set the strength to something silly. Let's try 1 and see how this goes, and see, we might have to set it even lower than this as well. Maybe 0.5. Then we are going to have to apply a new shader to this model. This shader is incredibly dull, so we are going to select both of these. Right mouse button, assign favorite material, and we're going to be setting this to a blend. What this is going to do, it's going to allow us to get a lot shinier model. Now, this is not a good shader in any way when it comes to actual, shading, but it's really good for viewport. So we're just going to be setting the eccentricity all the way down, and we're just going to be setting the specular color all the way up and reflectivity all the way up as well. So now we can see that we have a very shiny and reflective material, which means that if we were to actually sculpt on this using the sculpt tool, and let's use a shift right mouse button and set this to wax, now you can actually see what's going on. So what we are doing now is that we are generally just going over the model and just starting to refine it just a little bit. So just going over, hold down the control key when doing this, and just really just breaking the edges up a little. It's incredible how much just some edge breakup can do. A lot of people, they do this in texturing, but it's really bad, because then you're trying to fight against a model which isn't properly there. It's a much better idea to take the model as far as you possibly can, and then use texturing to take that as far as you possibly can there as well. Already now you can see this is really nice and broken up. And I really prefer using the wax brush for this, because it's just such a nice brush, because it's really organic and it's great for particularly these kind of hard edges. So I'm really just holding on the control key when doing this and just trying to get some variation into it. Now I'm just sculpting normally, just without holding the control key. Just to get some overall undulation happening. Now this is a task you can literally spend like 6 hours on. You can spend forever on this, and this is because this is where you're telling a lot of the story of the object you have. This would look very different if this came straight from the Spartan factory versus if this has been there for 500 years, 50 years, 2000 years, whatever it might be. They're just going to look very different based on that, and then the sculpting has to reflect that. Now, if you are serious about this kind of work, I highly recommend that you sculpt it in a proper software. I really recommend that you fire up ZBrush for this, which is really a fantastic tool. But since this is a Maya tutorial, we're going to take this as far as we can within Maya. Well, not as far as we can. We're going to do the whole thing in Maya. So just break up the general edges. That's going to do a lot to your model. You don't really want to have sharp edges. Maybe you can have some sharp edges here and there, but it's a really good idea to just go over all of them and just give them some undulation. We're also going to think about where we're actually going to be seeing the model from. We're going to be doing the final render for something like this. So there isn't really a whole lot of point in doing something like a crazy amount of work on the back, though we might want to have a turntable at some point. But just pick your battles. If you know where it's going to be viewed from, just sculpt it from there. If you know you're never going to see the inside of the helmet because there's a head there at all times, just don't spend your time sculpting that area. It's just going to save you a lot of time. And more importantly, you can spend that on areas which are more important. You have a finite amount of time to do anything when it comes to CG. You might as well spend that time on something else. If you spend time sculpting the inside of the helmet, that means there's less time to really make the lighting look nice or, shading, whatever it might be. So you can see I'm using literally the same brush for everything now, like keeping it very, very simple. You You can also add some bigger folds as well, like it's been really bashed up by a sword or an axe or, you know, something like that. We can also right click and show wireframe just so we have a little bit more control with what's going on. Just so it's a bit easier sometimes to see the shape when you actually have that. We can also set the specular color just down a little bit because it's getting very bright. Right click, show wireframe on and off, really useful. You also want to be careful that you don't have an area like this where this is great and then the back is completely untouched. That's just going to stick out like a sore thumb. People are going to see that right away and be like, wait a minute, hasn't this been bashed up? So it's very important to be consistent. Though, like I said, if it's literally not going to be seen, you know, there's no point in spending time on that. You can also disable the grid as that is not needed at all. Make sure to save your work as well. It's really important. The sculpting tools in general is stable. I haven't really had any crashes with them whatsoever. And I believe that's because they are just pushing and pulling points. They're not actually doing a whole lot. They're not adding new nodes or anything to it. They're literally just taking the points and just moving them around. And the huge advantage of doing it like this with no asymmetry, or with asymmetry without symmetry active, is that it's just going to look a lot more organic. It's just going to just feel a lot more interesting. Symmetry really stands out, so be very careful whenever you're doing that. Like we're using symmetry to get the base shape down, so like which you saw here. There's no point in modeling each side by itself. That would be a complete waste of time. But there's also no point in it's also not great to do everything symmetrically either. Yeah, so just looking at this shape, and now we can see we have a nice specular highlight. So let's just break it up a little. We are definitely going to be breaking this up with texturing as well, or when we're doing a shading, we're doing all the shading procedurally. But once you're doing that, you can also keep breaking the model up. It's not like we have the sculpting phase and then we have the texturing phase. You can still go back to this model, and since everything is in Maya directly, you can very easily just go in and just keep refining the model afterwards. I sometimes find that where I'm working on a shape, but I'm just like, I just need to break this up just a little bit. So also when these things were made, they were probably made with hammers and all sorts of heavy tools. And they're going to show that as well. So you might sometimes just want to break it up a little bit just because of that. There's no way that these here are going to be perfect. Like even when they're brand new, they might be super shiny and all that. There's going to be a crazy amount of undulation on them just by the very nature of how they were produced. So just doing some more low frequency changes now. I just accidentally enabled steady stroke as well. If you see this, that's because you've been holding control and right mouse button. So just disable that, just right mouse button, control right mouse button, steady stroke. It's really easy to do once sometimes because I use control to hold down control key to sculpt, and then you use a right mouse button and alt to navigate. So yeah, so I'm doing some more low frequency, and low frequency is the really low shapes, the really, really big shapes. And then a high frequency is all the super fancy high frequency, the little pores, the really fine breakup. So we're starting to get there. Now we just have to look at this guy as well. We can just click the sculpting tool over here to get the last used one. And now we can just break this up as well. When you see these really tight specular highlights like that, then you just have to break them up. You really, particularly for something like this, you really don't want to have like a nice parallel line going all the way around with no breakup whatsoever. That just looks really CG. or really mechanical. If you're doing a perfectly machined piece like an iPhone or something like that, you're clearly going to have to do that. But if you're doing something like this, something which is man-made or handmade rather, you really want to break it up. And if you want this to be sharper, you can also just increase the amount of smoothing we did to it. Now, a little caveat to that is if you do increase the smoothing, meaning that, the smooth operator we enabled, this one, then you can't really take it up and down. This doesn't work like a subdivision modifier in other software. This is more like if you do that, then you're going to be in trouble. It works sometimes, but it's really not a reliable way of doing it. So I know that I'm going to be looking at it from this angle. So it's more important to me that this side looks good than the other side. So I'll do an overall pass for everything. And you should really do this as well. Just spend like an hour or so, even after the video, even after the video is ended, just to really just break everything up. You can also hit Control middle mouse button to increase the size as well, which is quite handy. If you just want to, make it tiny, you can hold Control middle mouse button, and you don't actually have to hit the B key as well. Though that's my preferred way of doing it, because that's how you change everything when it comes to the size. But that's again personal preference. There's so many ways of doing everything in Maya. And don't be afraid of these kind of marks. This here is more of a low frequency mark, but don't be afraid of that. You can definitely do these kind of bigger changes to your model, and that's going to look just really nice as long as you do them in select spots. We can go back to our helmet, click the sculpt icon or the sculpt brush, and then we can just go a bit more into it and just try to get a bit more shape. I just want to get a bit more actual definition in some of these little creases. Just breaking a bit more up, a bit more low frequency. So this is pretty much as far as I'll take it. This is really one of these where you can keep refining it forever, but we really aren't going to be taking this much further. You're more than welcome to take this as far as you want to, but this is around as far as we'll take this guy. So now we have a model which is pretty much ready for shading and grooming and all of that. The scene is nice and clean, and we don't rely on the image planes anymore, so we can just straight up delete those. And we are going to continue with this in the next chapter.